In Nederland hebben we niets te klagen.
In Holland, there is nothing to complain about. According to the World Happiness Report 2017, annually issued by the United Nations, our land ranks up to number 6. The United Nations wants to make governments see the importance of the subjective well-being of the populations. So there seems to be nothing wrong with the subjective well-being of the Dutch. Although we are known as a people of complainants and grumblers, we still dwell in the higher regions of happiness. Though this investigation gives the impression of Dutch welfare, how do we explain the fact that there is also much discontent and dissatisfaction? The figures are significant. According to the Trimbos Institute, almost 20% of the Dutch adults between 18 and 45 will get involved in a depression. Holland is known as one of the most depressive nations of Europe. Over 1 million of people in Holland are estimated to suffer from some form of depression. Unfortunately, this is not only the case in Holland. Worldwide, millions of people are involved. Depression will be endemic disease number 1 in our society of 2020, according to the World Health Organization. This is one of the examples that illustrates that something is wrong. This afternoon's first workshop, we will get back to this. How is it that so many people seem to have no joy of life? And how can we help each other best? People's well-being doesn't seem to increase if we look at the world with its problems. For instance, how does the daily news influence the general well-being? Reading our papers and watching the news on television, radio or social media, we are immediately overflown with all sorts of bad news. We are continually confronted with the negativity of facts. What are we supposed to do with all this? We often do not know. Old established certainties no longer hold and disappear. To some people this means a kind of emptiness, a lack of a common vision on life. This may give depression as a resultant, or one may flee in the virtual world of the World Wide Web, or even worse, one may seek escape in some addiction. Furthermore, it can be noticed that truth is easily fiddled with nowadays. Emotions and personal convictions often prevail. This could be clearly observed in the preparatory phase to the Brexit, and also during the American presidential elections. Fake news, misleading information, it's all part of this, and that makes it even more difficult to establish the truth.
We are part of a turbulent world right in the middle of it all. Our involvement in the world's affairs expands all the time, and along with that, our mutual responsibility expands. People are not disconnected from each other. We become more and more aware of this. When something happens on the other side of the world, we know it within minutes. Retreating or ignoring are no options anymore. Of course, there are positive developments. Worldwide poverty has diminished. Men's health has improved. On average, we all live longer. There is growing attention for green sustainability. There is more effort on environmental questions, and many people still engage in voluntary service. So a lot of good is being done as well. Nevertheless, there is reason for concern. Certainly, we cannot speak of a harmonious and healthy world. That surely demands a change of mentality. The idea must be ensured that man has the abilities for so much more equality of life than he imagines and shows now. In our thinking faculty, we possess all the possibilities to make our world a dynamic, harmonious one. However, let's start with the situation of today's world. How has the world as it is today been brought about? Perhaps one may be astonished to learn that it is all our conflicting opinions that have enabled us. Let us examine the word opinion. An opinion is a subjective point of view on our attitudes towards situations, events or persons. A typical characteristic of an opinion is its volatility. Opinions change in time. We all interpret circumstances, facts, truths, each in our own way. Generally speaking, we are used to look through our own eyes at things, based on our education and experiences, on what we have heard or read from others, on what other people do. In short, within the frame of reference we ourselves have built up. At the same time, we assume that what we perceive with our senses is really true. So an opinion is a personal, mostly transitory interpretation of perceptions. Of course, opinions can be substantiated with arguments or knowledge, but apart from well-founded opinions, there exist less informed opinions, though the latter may be supported by a lot of people. Because people rather differ, it is not surprising that there exist many opinions concerning all sorts of things. Disagreements are a daily reality, and there need not be any objection to this, if only we listen to each other respectfully. And that is the crux of the matter, because this often is not the case.
Opinions are randomly being used and misused, even in unpleasant ways, which can offend people. Because opinions are sometimes diametrically opposed, they collide and generate misunderstandings which may result in real conflicts. In this afternoon's second workshop, we will address this. In short, Cicero, the Roman scholar, put it this way: as many men, so many opinions. One would think that these days of supersonic communication would give us much more means to find out the truth. Just giving a search prompt in any browser on any subject delivers a wealth of information. At the same time, however, this can be a pitfall. Exactly this tremendous amount of information about any subject may differ to such an extent that it results in utter confusion. Then what do? We choose what confirms our own ideas and we ignore opposite points of view. Platforms like Google, Twitter and Facebook contribute to that. They filter information using formally used keywords from your search history, ensuring that the information links with your preferences. This includes fake news. In this way, your own limited vision, your own filter bubble, as it is popularly called, is constantly confirmed. This largely increases the risk that you will get less and less critical about your own ideas, and you will get accustomed to the habit not to investigate other opinions. Of course, this cannot lead to finding any truth. On the contrary. But what happens if you burst your bubble? Then you will notice that there is much more to experience than you ever imagined. On one side, this is very appealing, but on the other hand, this needs careful consideration on matters we have made ourselves believe in and on issues we were not involved in before. Not often we do our best to put ourselves in other mental worlds. We then simply won't understand each other. get stuck in our own opinions, ideas, and personal interests. We call it living in your bubble, described as a state of consciousness in which you only pick up information that fits your personal view. You feel comfortable with your own opinion. Other opinions are not interesting or are considered nonsense. And we welcome gladly that information that pleases us, that fits our interests, for the very reason we all have our own thinking patterns. Before we know it, we find ourselves living in our own self-confirming bubble. We selectively only pick up that kind of information that suits us.
A striking example of all those bubbles could be observed in March of this year, when we had elections in Holland and could choose from 28 parties, groups of people, all living in their own particular bubble, granting reality to it. And all those parties had their supporters, some more, some less, but even so. Whatever party tells us the truth. A truth is something you have investigated yourself and that you have experienced as being right. But your own truth is always a limited and relative one. It's only just a piece of a greater truth. How can you distill what is true from that multitude of opinions? We will need a method for this, a fundamental touchstone. Well, so-called objective idealism is such a fundamental touchstone. It involves that something is true as long as a perceiving consciousness, this includes human beings of course, attributes truth or reality to it. That may sound complicated, but it is quite simple really. Let me illustrate this with a few examples. If supporters of rival football clubs watch the same match between those clubs and you ask them what they have seen, you may well expect them each to have seen a different game. For they interpreted the game with a consciousness that was directed personally, that means from their respective opinions, sympathies, preferences, etc. We also know a toddler who witnessed her nanny changing into a clown's outfit and, for the girl, she became that clown. When later on the nanny appeared in her normal clothes again, the girl told her, "Miss, there was a clown here." You can see that she gave the human being who was dressed as a clown the reality of a clown. She perceived the phenomenon nanny as a clown. Actually, as adult human beings, we do exactly the same as that little toddler did. We create our own perspectives on reality. We color the world with our opinions. The way we are is how we perceive the world. When we are in a happy mood, we experience the weather entirely different compared to when we got out of bed on the wrong side. Objective idealism explains why one Dutchman feels happy while another, in the same circumstances, is unhappy. It is not the external circumstances that determine happiness or grief. It is the consciousness that interprets the circumstances. And because we have no universal standards, it's easy to imagine that the person who is happy now will be unhappy or even depressed in the near future, or the other way around, of course, while circumstances have hardly changed. We can perceive only what we developed in our consciousness ourselves. If something is not a living reality in us, we will not perceive it. So we all mirror reality in our own way. This in itself does not mean that we must find ourselves in an impenetrable bubble, provided we are aware of this fact, because then we keep in mind the possibility that we do not interpret our perceptions correctly and that our truth can be expanded, that there is always a deeper or greater truth.
We should be willing to invest in it, to consider other insights and investigate further to gain more and broader experience. Those experiences can be compared to other experiences. And in this way, our truth can be expanded and we can ask ourselves what we can share within the possibilities of the world. So if you search for truth, you will find many truths. In other words, all found truths are relative ones, not false per se, but limited. They spring forth from limited human consciousness. And because every human, however educated they may be, is limited, their reality or truth is limited as well. Must we conclude then that there can be no greater truth or reality? No, that's not the case. But a comprehensive vision of this grander truth lies beyond human cognitive ability. We, limited humans, simply cannot grasp the concept of the boundless. And still, and this is the great paradox, we are all part of this boundless reality. It is a logical conclusion, for because that reality is boundless, everything is part of it. It means that there is a greater reality behind everything, every phenomenon. This is a force we call consciousness. If boundlessness exists, there is one grand, comprehensive truth, which for us is inconceivable. Every mental image of it we have is a limited one. In this way, we have our own personal truth, consisting of what we have experienced to be true, what we call true. An understanding to some extent of these two ideas is all you need to prevent you from ever finding yourself in a bubble again, because you realize that your personal truth always is a partial truth. In other words, however vast and grand your truth may be, there is always more. There is always an even greater truth. So we can say that something that you yourself experience to be true, because you tested it within your powers and with the knowledge you already gained, is your truth. You experienced it as such. Not the perceived circumstances, but our interpretation of them is crucial. If you think this true, it means that although you perceive with your senses, you interpret this perception with your thought. In fact, we perceive with our mind. That is to say that because of the way we think, a mental image is created of everything we perceive in whatever way. We can focus our mind entirely on the external world with our thoughts. Most people do. Everything we see, hear, smell and touch we call truth then. And we consider our changeable opinions to be truth as well. But we also know that this sensory world is never what our senses want to make us believe. Our senses deceive us. They make us live in an illusory world. We could give many examples of this.
For one, if we would not know that the moon reflects the light of the sun, our senses would have us believe that the moon is a source of light itself and that it continuously changes shape in 28 days. We would think that matter is solid instead of knowing that it exists of atoms that are continuously moving at an enormous speed. And of humans, we would think that they are their bodies. That would be our truth. But our mind can also give another explanation to the same perception. And then we see the body not as being the human itself, but as a vehicle the human uses. The point is that we should learn to interpret what we perceive in another way. That way we would create other truths for ourselves. We would reach entirely different conclusions. Humans, animals, plants, stars, yes, everything would be considered above all as a conscious living force. Usually we call this consciousness. And this consciousness is nothing but being conscious. In Dutch we literally call it bewustzijn, being conscious. So everything is consciousness, but it is not all identical consciousness. People differ from animals and plants, and obviously humans differ from each other as well. All humans possess self-consciousness. They are able to focus on themselves, view inside themselves. That is because our consciousness has a thinking quality. It is this ability to think which allows us to interpret the world and which allows us to create our own truth. However, this thinking activity is not something homogeneous. You probably experience this yourselves. There are many kinds of thoughts, ways of thinking. The more universal our thoughts are, the more universal our truth is. And the more personal our thoughts, and the more reality we attribute to the external world, the more restricted our world is. We hold illusions to be reality then. In the next presentation, Mariska will elaborate on those different ways of thinking, those different aspects of thinking, as we call them. We live in a world of phenomena, of outer appearances. That means that behind this world consciousness is active. This consciousness can be traced back to the boundless truth in the end, because everything is part of the boundless. That is why we are able to find truth, although we live in this phenomenal world. This truth can be recognized in all things, and we can penetrate this more universal truth even deeper. In fact, but we must explore independently, have an open mind towards a greater vision. We must ask ourselves questions, and we must love truth. Everyone can obtain greater truth, each with his or her own level of thought. To search for truth independently doesn't mean that we must do it alone. We can learn from others. By exchanging ideas, we can learn to see more truth. We show respect to someone only if we take their ideas seriously.
Which doesn't mean that we have to take those ideas for granted. No, we should give them some fair thought. Doing so, we should be understanding, empathetic, and confident instead of suspicious. The fact that we are living in turbulent times doesn't force us to quit our search for truth. On the contrary. Of course, there is tension and pressure in almost everyone's life. But it is turmoil like this that offers people the chance to reflect more profoundly on experiences that are sometimes unpleasant. Much can be learned from that, mentally as well as spiritually. If we succeed in remaining calm, despite the turmoil, we can make more progress now than in any other time. In this process, it is important not to focus on outer appearances, but rather to consult our inner consciousness. It is a joyous activity, actually. The question for truth is not something that has to be done with a grumpy face. Becoming aware of the many, many aspects of life will already provide you with a different view. It is a challenge to set an ideal for yourself of how things can be better and to try to live according to your highest ethical standards. From the next presentation on, it will be explained that in our mind, our ability to think, we have the potential to move towards compassion and wisdom.